Tehran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz is literally the only thing stopping its regime from being completely overrun during Operation Epic Fury. But right now, that Iranian grip is being violently shattered. AH-64 Apache helicopters are executing something massive in the Strait of Hormuz, delivering brutal kinetic payback to the Iranian regime. The IRGC just got hit so hard they thought Armageddon had arrived, and it is all thanks to an attack chopper that represents the absolute apex of American close air support. Make sure you are subscribed to Titan Mechanics and hit that bell icon so you never miss a critical military intel update. And let us know where you stand right now in the comments. Drop a 5 if you stand with the US, press 6 if you back Iran, or hit 7 if you just want peace. Now, let's look at the intel. On March 22nd, Army Recognition reported that the Pentagon deployed heavily armed Apache helicopters alongside another legendary aerial asset we will cover later in this briefing to systematically hunt and destroy Iranian threats in the Strait of Hormuz, both hugging the coastline and in the open water. These combat helicopters are currently operating throughout Iran's southern coastline, an AO where American forces have achieved near absolute air supremacy. They are operating in a sanitized, controlled air environment that enables them to loiter and launch surgical precision strikes against the remnants of Iran's military and naval infrastructure. This is a massive tactical shift by Washington. It signals an aggressive new posture as America moves to permanently secure the Strait of Hormuz, guaranteeing the safe transit of dozens of global merchant ships that rely on that waterway. In the AH-64 Apache, CENTCOM possesses an aerial asset that brings devastating firepower to the battle space. Loaded with state-of-the-art electro-optical and infrared sensors, the Apache operates as a heavily armed early warning node for the rest of America's strike packages, instantly detecting incoming suicide drones, fast attack craft, and other asymmetric threats in the strait. Not that the Apache actually needs backup to neutralize those targets. Its AGM-114 Hellfire missiles fly supersonic, hit with devastating kinetic force, and are the absolute perfect countermeasure for the swarm tactics Iran utilizes in the Strait of Hormuz. Compound that lethal payload with a top speed pushing 170 miles per hour, more than enough velocity to run down even the fastest interceptor vessels the IRGC deploys against civilian tankers. And you have a heavily armored gunship that can sense threats over the horizon, react instantly, and obliterate almost anything in its path. We will break down exactly why Iran's fast boats have become the primary tactical problem in the strait in just a few minutes. But first, we need to analyze the sheer combat capability the Apache brings to this fight. These gunships have been the backbone of close air support since the 1980s, operated by the US, Israel, the Netherlands, and Japan for one very specific reason. They are arguably the most lethal and versatile attack helicopters on the planet. Beyond the Hellfire missiles, every single Apache is built around a devastating 30mm M230 chain gun slung right under its fuselage. Firing at a cyclic rate of 625 rounds per minute, that cannon can physically shred fiberglass fast boats and composite drones in a heartbeat, and every Apache carries a massive magazine of 1,200 rounds to ensure it can prosecute multiple targets in a single sortie. A 1-second burst unleashes roughly 10 high-explosive dual-purpose rounds, which is absolute overkill for the types of unarmored asymmetric threats the Apache is hunting in the Strait of Hormuz. But CENTCOM also loaded the Apache with options beyond air-to-ground missiles. Stinger missiles, AIM-9 sidewinders, and Mistrals can be integrated on a mission-by-mission basis, granting the chopper potent air-to-air lethality if the IRGC is foolish enough to launch any surviving airframes from its antiquated Air Force. The Apache also rolls into combat wrapped in a highly classified electronic warfare suite, packing radio jammers, advanced infrared countermeasures, and radar interference equipment. This makes the Apache a flying death sentence for Iranian assets operating in the strait, blinding their sensors even before the gunship goes kinetic. And the tactical nightmare gets worse for Tehran. The Apache can also deploy rockets armed with inert, kinetic-only warheads. It sounds counterintuitive to claim non-explosive ordnance is an advantage, but this allows the Apache to unleash rockets that obliterate fragile targets through sheer, brutal kinetic energy. Think about the primary asymmetric weapon Iran deploys in the Strait right now, Shahed suicide drones. With these specific rockets, the Apache can physically swat those drones out of the sky without wasting expensive high explosive material. The rocket simply impacts the target, and the massive kinetic transfer shreds the drone mid-air. Furthermore, the Apache is the ultimate deck hugger. It is engineered to fly nap of the earth or skim feet above sea level whenever required. So, if CENTCOM needs a heavily armored gunship that can maneuver face-to-face with IRGC fast boats in the claustrophobic confines of the Strait, they just deployed the perfect weapon. Let's focus on those fast attack craft for a moment. While there are multiple strategic reasons the Apache is dominating the Strait of Hormuz right now, neutralizing the Iranian fast boat swarms is the absolute top priority. As the Wall Street Journal detailed on March 19th, the deployment of Apache gunships represents the opening salvo of a massive new campaign to forcibly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway Iran had mostly managed to blockade through terror tactics in the wake of Operation Epic Fury. The stepped-up operation is part of a multi-stage Pentagon plan to systematically reduce the asymmetric danger from Iranian armed boats, naval mines, and coastal cruise missiles, which effectively halted international ship traffic since early March. If CENTCOM can degrade that threat matrix, the US Navy intends to push heavily armed warships straight through the choke point and eventually establish armed escorts for merchant vessels transiting the Persian Gulf. And it is exactly those armed boats the journal highlights that are the primary prey for the Apache hunters. Why? We have to examine Iran's naval doctrine and why it has been so frustratingly effective in the Strait. In a mid-March tactical breakdown, the Times explained that Iran completely ignores the conventional rules of naval warfare. Yes, they possessed a conventional navy, or rather, they used to. American air power has done an incredibly efficient job of vaporizing those larger vessels, reportedly sinking roughly 60 Iranian naval ships by mid-March. But conventional frigates were never the true pillar of Iran's naval strategy. The fast boat swarms are, and the Strait of Hormuz is their ideal hunting ground. These vessels, essentially civilian speedboats hastily retrofitted with heavy machine guns, unguided rockets, or packed to the brim with high explosives, are tactically useless against an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. But they aren't designed to fight destroyers. Their sole purpose is to rapidly swarm massive, slow-moving, completely defenseless commercial container ships and oil tankers transiting the narrow strait. They rush in, unleash their payload, and scatter back to hidden coastal inlets at maximum speed. This is textbook asymmetric warfare executed by a regime that knows it would be instantly annihilated in a conventional naval battle against the United States, and it allows Tehran to inflict massive economic damage on global shipping that has absolutely nothing to do with the military conflict. Furthermore, the IRGC utilizes these small craft for highly deniable covert operations. As former Royal Navy officer Kevin Rowlands detailed to The Times, the IRGC utilizes unmanned boat drones, weaponized jet skis, and rudimentary naval mines to achieve a vastly disproportionate strategic impact. You do not need a multi-million-dollar mine-laying vessel. You can drop a lethal contact mine from a simple rowboat if necessary. Consequently, the US Navy is facing a threat profile entirely different from a near-peer adversary like Russia or China. While a near-peer would attempt fleet-on-fleet engagements, Iran relies entirely on generating asymmetric chaos in the Strait. And that chaos is having a devastating tangible impact. According to Australia's ABC News, Iran has successfully struck at least 20 merchant vessels since Operation Epic Fury commenced. On a strategic level, Tehran is utilizing these strikes to broadcast a single message to the global markets. The US military cannot guarantee the safety of civilian shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, effectively establishing the blockade we mentioned earlier. And that blockade is an unacceptable strategic reality for Washington. The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the single most critical maritime choke point on Earth. Connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, it is the primary artery for energy tankers exporting from Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to the rest of the industrialized world. Roughly 20% of the world's entire crude oil supply, and a similar percentage of liquefied natural gas, must flow through this narrow passage, which at its tightest point is a mere 21 miles wide. That is an incredibly short distance for an IRGC fastboat or a Shahed drone to cover. There There is even high-level intelligence suggesting Iran's disruption of the strait could severely impact the U.S. defense industrial base, as critical rare earth minerals required for advanced American munitions transit that exact same route. So, we are seeing Iran utilize its cheap asymmetric threats to counteract the devastating high-end aerial bombardment the US has unleashed during Operation Epic Fury. Iran cannot survive a punch-to-punch slugfest with the US military, but it can deploy cheap swarms that billion-dollar stealth fighters and massive destroyers are simply not optimized to fight. And that is exactly where the Apache comes in. With Apaches constantly orbiting over the Strait of Hormuz, CENTCOM possesses an asset equipped with the hypersensitive optics to detect fast boats leaving port, the raw speed to run them down, and the pinpoint firepower to turn them into floating debris, or even obliterate the makeshift coastal hideouts they operate from. This is the ultimate highly versatile kinetic response to an asymmetric threat. And the IRGC's suicide drones will not fare any better. The exact same thermal sensors tracking the fast boats easily acquire the heat signatures of Iran's Shahed drones in flight. The Apache is perfectly designed to drop down to the deck and hunt these terrain-hugging munitions, shredding them with the 30mm cannon before they reach their targets. If Tehran needed graphic proof that the Apache is their worst nightmare, the footage is already circulating. Combat video has emerged, showing Apache gunships effortlessly swatting Shahed drones out of the sky. Released by the United Arab Emirates, another highly capable operator of the AH-64. The gun camera footage shows the Apache's targeting reticle locking onto a Shahed. A brief, violent burst from the M230 chain gun, and the drone simply ceases to exist. It is brutally fast, highly cost-effective firepower, and the combat video shows at least half a dozen Iranian Shaheds being systematically blown out of the sky by Apache crews. We are seeing allied nations utilizing the Apache for the exact same critical mission profile the US is currently executing over the Strait of Hormuz. However, there is an obvious tactical question here. The UAE footage was recorded in their own heavily defended airspace. The US is sending non-stealthy helicopters directly into Iranian airspace over the Strait of Hormuz. Isn't that an unacceptable risk for the pilots? It would be if Iran actually possessed a functioning air defense grid. But the reality is Iran's integrated air defense network has been systematically crippled to the point where American gunships can operate with near impunity, facing minimal threat from heavy SAMs or radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery. As we analyzed earlier, the US has successfully established a completely sanitized air environment for its Apaches to operate within. The initial, overwhelming waves of American and Israeli strikes were explicitly designed to blind and shatter every critical node of Iran's military infrastructure. By March 4th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth boldly declared that the US would soon achieve complete control of Iranian skies, uncontested airspace. He was directly referencing the classified battle damage assessments confirming the vast majority of Iran's strategic SAM sites were smoking craters. By the third week of Operation Epic Fury, intelligence from the Alma Research and Education Center confirmed IDF assessments that a staggering 85% of Iran's entire air defense capability had been permanently taken offline. That specific kinetic success blew the door wide open for the Apaches. America's premier gunship can now prowl the Strait of Hormuz almost unimpeded, only having to mitigate the threat of isolated optically guided manpads or disconnected remnant systems. And those isolated threats are being actively hunted and mopped up by continuous F-35 and F-15E strike packages, meaning the airspace becomes statistically safer for the Apache crews with every passing hour. So, the Apache is off the leash, completely free to focus its lethal attention on vaporizing Iran's fast boat swarms and suicide drones. However, these attack choppers might actually be prepping the battle space for something infinitely more devastating to the Iranian regime. But before we declassify that operation, we need to address the other legendary aircraft joining the Apache in the Strait. Working in tandem, this second airframe gives CENTCOM absolute overwhelming dominance over the waterway. We are talking about the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the legendary Warthog, and the combined firepower of an Apache and a Warthog operating as a hunter-killer team is enough to make any IRGC boat crew instantly surrender. Built around the massive GAU 8 30mm Avenger cannon, on which is essentially a massive Gatling gun that happens to have wings attached. The A-10 effortlessly shreds through composite drones and fiberglass boats. Furthermore, it brings heavy AGM-65 Maverick missiles and a massive payload of precision-guided JDAMs to obliterate hardened coastal targets, missile bunkers, and IRG seaport facilities. Like the Apache, the A-10 thrives at low altitudes, allowing pilots to visually identify and destroy valid military targets in a congested waterway crowded with civilian tankers. And encased in a titanium bathtub, the Warthog pilot is heavily protected against the isolated small arms ground fire we mentioned earlier. This is CENTCOM executing a masterclass in layered close air support, utilizing two legendary battle-proven platforms in an environment made possible by absolute American air supremacy. The tactical reality is brutal. Apache's aggressively patrolling the strait, actively hunting drones and fast boats, while the A-10s orbit slightly higher, ready to dive in and unleash hell on any coastal missile site or port facility that dares to activate. This establishes a permanent, lethal, and unblinking aerial overwatch that makes Iran's asymmetric swarm tactics virtually impossible to execute without facing instant annihilation. But the strategic picture gets even bigger. We assessed earlier that the Apaches might be setting the stage for a massive escalation. That escalation is the highly anticipated arrival of conventional US ground forces, with mounting intelligence suggesting a massive amphibious assault on Karg Island is imminent. Right now, the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit is burning fuel toward the Middle East. That heavily armed force of 2,200 US Marines departed San Diego on March 18th, following directly behind the 31st MEU, which deployed from the Indo-Pacific just a week prior. The Pentagon is surging over 4,000 elite Marines directly toward Iran, and the strategic consensus is they are staging for a massive operation while President Trump finalizes the authorization for a ground assault on Karg Island. While the specifics of that amphibious invasion are highly classified, the presence of Apaches and A-10s makes perfect tactical sense if a D-Day style landing is the ultimate objective. Look at the historical combat data from the initial invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. In both massive campaigns, CENTCOM deployed Apaches and Warthogs to relentlessly pound enemy positions and provide danger close air support for advancing ground troops. These exact airframes are designed to suppress and destroy entrenched infantry and armored formations, the exact type of defensive fortifications the Marines will encounter if they storm the beaches of Karg Island. In Operation Desert Storm, Apaches executed deep strike operations to vaporize Iraqi armored columns long before the tanks even arrived. And are we witnessing the exact same tactical playbook being prepped for Karg Island? American bombers have already pulverized the military infrastructure on that island while intentionally leaving the lucrative oil terminals completely intact. What if the ultimate strategic objective was always to physically occupy Karg Island, to forcibly seize control of the massive oil terminals and physically choke off the single most critical economic lifeline the Iranian regime requires to fund this war? We will know soon enough if the Marines get the green light. But even if the boots never hit the ground, the Apaches and Warthogs dominating the skies over the Strait of Hormuz are a terminal problem for Tehran. The IRGC fast boats and suicide drones that formed the core of their naval doctrine are now nothing more than target practice. And every single time that 30mm chain gun rattles, it is a brutal reminder to the regime that the United States possesses overwhelming, lethal solutions for every asymmetric trick Iran attempts to play. Drop a 5 in the comments if you stand with the US, press 6 if you back Iran, or hit 7 if you just want peace. Hit that subscribe button and we will see you on the next tactical briefing.